Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Scott Luton here with you on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's live stream. Hey, folks, today we've got a very special edition of Breaking News Now, where we're going to be focused on the subject of supply chain and business conversations everywhere, tariffs and trade policies, right? We're going to be spending the next half hour or so becoming much more informed on what has been taking place and what to expect moving forward. So, to do just that, we have one of the best guests I can imagine, very timely here. Our guest has extensive experience in supply chain, international trade, and customs related issues, amongst many leadership roles. Our guest previously served as a policy analyst in the Office of Policy and Planning for U.S. Customs and Border Protection. He served on a variety of government advisory committees with the U.S. Department of Commerce, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and plenty of others. And he's currently responsible, get this, for representing the retail industry before the U.S. Congress and administration on a wide range of issues tied to global supply chain management. I want to welcome in our friend Jon Gold, Vice President, Supply Chain and Customs Policy with the National Retail Federation. Hey, Jon, how are you doing today?
Good, Scott. How are you?
I am good, and I bet you are as busy as you can be in recent memory. Is that right?
There's just a few things going on right now, so yeah, staying a little busy.
Well, as busy as you are with full plates, I appreciate you spending some time here helping us
Absolutely.
better understand what's going on, and that's where we want to start. Right, we're gonna get right into it. Most folks are probably aware of the basics of what has transpired. Right, the White House issues a 25% tariff on Mexico and Canada last weekend, as well as 10% tariffs on China. And now, after discussions with Mexico and Canada, the tariffs have been delayed for a month or so while the sides continue to negotiate. And Jon, it appears, we'll probably get your perspective here in a minute, it appears that new collaboration opportunities have emerged from those discussions between our North American trading partners and allies. And that's where I want to start. So, focusing in on Mexico and Canada first, what are the latest developments that business leaders should be aware of?
Sure. So I think you laid it out correctly. Even before the president took office, there was a lot of discussion about the ongoing crisis at the border. I mean, obviously, this is one of the major issues that he ran on, both immigration and fentanyl. So after the election, he started talking about the potential for 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, as well as a 10% tariff on China to address these ongoing issues. Uh, we had really thought that on kind of the day one of the inauguration that he was going to sign some kind of big tariff order as kind of part of the executive orders that he signed.
Right.
He didn't do that. He signed the America First Trade Policy memo, which kind of laid out a variety of different issues on trade where they want to go. And we can get into that in a little bit. But during kind of the signing ceremony, he was asked about tariffs because he didn't use tariffs on the day one. And then all of a sudden he said, probably see tariffs in Mexico and Canada on February 1. So, for the past week and a half, there was a lot of consternation about, will it or won't it happen? And then again on Friday, the White House press secretary said, tariffs are going to go into effect on February 1. And then we spent pretty much all day Saturday waiting for the announcement of the executive orders, which were signed in the afternoon, which, as you noted, had a 25% tariff on Mexico, 25% tariff on most goods coming out of Canada, then 10% on energy resources, and a 10% tariff on all Chinese products. Again, focused on the border-related issues, on fentanyl and immigration. So with that, there were ongoing discussions. The tariffs were set to take effect today, the 4th, 12:01 a.m. today. So yesterday, there were some last-minute conversations with President Sheinbaum from Mexico and Prime Minister Trudeau in Canada, and those conversations resulted in a 30-day delay of the tariffs as conversations continue. Mexico had pledged to bring, I think, an additional 10,000 troops to the border to focus on immigration-related issues and focus on the cartels and drugs, and Canada following through on their earlier commitment to do, I think it was $1.3 billion investment into border security, creating a fentanyl czar, a strike force to work with the U.S., and there'll be ongoing conversations for the next 30 days to address some of the ongoing issues and try and figure out a right path going forwards. There's no agreement with China yet, so those tariffs actually took effect at 12:01 a.m. this morning. And I think the most interesting fact for folks to understand with China, in the executive orders that were signed, they provided for what they call an on the water provision. So if your cargo was loaded prior to February 1, it would not be subject to the tariffs because that'll
Hmm.
put you at unfair advantage because you bought and paid for this stuff, then all of a sudden you're subject to a tariff that you didn't know about. So that on the water provision goes till like March 7, but it's for anything that's prior to February 1. But the big issue is going to be impact on e-commerce shipments because you've got a lot of those de minimis shipments that are coming in from China either via air or being trucked in from Canada or Mexico, and those are being impacted immediately because part of the order was to suspend the use of de minimis as well as the use of duty drawback. So that's pretty significant impact on e-commerce trade
Right.
that we're already starting to see today.
All right. So I already feel smarter after the last 3 minutes with you, John. I tell you. Let's go back though. I want to go back. Kind of a two-part question. The agreements and the concessions that I'm here might not be the right word, but that Mexico and Canada have been making, which has helped delay the tariffs as negotiations continued. If I heard you correctly, with Mexico, it was a newer support for what we're trying to do with the border, and with Canada,
Correct.
was it maybe a recommitment of a past commitment?
Canada had previously talked about investing $1.3 billion into the border for a variety of reasons. So it was that plus this new fentanyl czar that they're creating, the strike force that they're creating as well to address some of these issues. So that's my understanding, kind of what's been on the table. Part of the challenge that I think Mexico and Canada have had, and even China to a lesser degree, was trying to figure out exactly what the administration wanted them to do to address the
Right.
issues. And we've talked to the Canadian embassy, and there's been just ongoing. They keep offering and offering. We're trying to figure out what exactly they wanted. The president on Saturday at one point said, there was nothing that Canada, Mexico, or China could do to avoid the tariffs. Well,
Hmm.
they found something to do because they avoided the tariffs.
Right.
So it's trying to figure out what is the national emergency, and using tariffs for that purpose. I think is a bit of a challenge, and I know we can get into that conversation as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of folks may share that heartburn, and hopefully what it comes out in the final agreements, at least will and I'm very optimistic of what the next month will bring. One of the most unique, if not the most unique, trading region in all the world. Right. So I'm hoping that we can find a lot more common ground. I would ask you this though, and we'll get into China in just a second, more about China in just a second. What do you think? Hate to ask conjecture, but in talking with people on my end, it's not just about the fentanyl. It's not just about border security, but there's some overarching objectives. It seems like the White House is after. What do you see there?
So obviously the president and his advisors have talked for a while about tariffs as a tool, and they talk about it for a variety of different reasons. First and foremost, tariffs are a negotiating tactic to get countries to come to the table to talk about ongoing issues, to try and address. It is a means to get companies to get out of China, and we saw that back in 2018 and 2019 with the Section 301 tariffs that were put in place on China, where you saw a significant shift of a lot of companies, out of China. Not a lot came back to the U.S., but you saw other diversification into Southeast Asia, Latin America, and elsewhere. That diversification obviously was amplified during the pandemic too, as folks were looking at the challenge of the single sourcing and needing for more diversification. They talk about tariffs as a means to bring back more manufacturing to the United States. Uh, whether that's going to happen or not, I don't know, but I think we've got to be more focused on what kind of manufacturing do we actually want to come back here.
Right.
Let's focus on the high tech, defense, industrial, critical minerals, kind of those urgent and really critical areas that we need to be more self sufficient at. And then the other thing they talk about for tariffs is as a revenue source. You've heard the president talk about replacing the income tax with tariffs. The Congress right now is looking at a renewal of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that a lot of those provisions are set to expire towards the end of the year. A lot of the individual provisions, so they got to find a pay for that. So looking at tariffs as potentially pay for. He's talked about the no tax on tips and using tariffs to pay for that. He keeps going back to kind of the pre 1890s, 1930, when we relied a lot on tariffs to as an income source for the country. But the economy is very, very different right now. I don't think we can tariff ourselves enough to get to that perspective, to get to that funding level. And the challenge there too is that you've got a lot of low income, middle income families who don't pay taxes. So if you put a tariff in place as opposed to that, they're going to get hit hardest because they're the ones who are going to have to pay without that discretionary income. So a wide variety of use of tariffs, which kind of conflict with each other at certain times. So, we certainly think tariffs are an important tool in the toolbox, but they've got to be used in a strategic manner and not kind of on the broad base, but really focused on, what is the clear policy that we want to have achieved. But, the broad base are going to, certainly hurt consumers and other industries across the board.
Lots of headaches, especially for our hardworking supply chain professionals out there trying to make a ton of confident and timely decisions. Let's talk just one more moment about China. You shared a lot, including some of the impact, some of the on the water provision you talked about, of course, the de minimis impact as well. If you had to offer a prognostication for what lies ahead, is it fair to say that we're more optimistic about a good deal being done with Canada, Mexico, and the U.S., where the tariffs could be averted based on the common ground found, as opposed to the Chinese, the tariffs applied to China might be more permanent, at least through the next 4 years? Is that your general position?
I think there's an opportunity with China to get a deal. Obviously, there's been ongoing conversations. I think President Xi is having a conversation with the president this afternoon, so that could certainly lead to a deal. China announced their own retaliatory measures in response to the tariffs. Those don't take effect until I think it was February 10th. So that gives them time to work through a potential deal to address some of this stuff. The president is very transactional. He's a deal maker. So I think he's looking for any opportunity to get a deal done. And I think focusing again on the fentanyl issue, the precursors, and trying to get China to do more to address that, I think there's opportunity there for him to achieve a deal. I think, again, in light of what we saw with Canada and Mexico, I think, hopefully we'll see some positive news, in the next day or so on China.
Okay. I feel like Kevin Garnett at the end of the game when he won the championship with Boston Celtics, and he yelled into the camera, "Anything is possible," and that's kind of what we're seeing.
Yeah.
They got 6 days, perhaps, before the from what I'm hearing you say, before the China's retaliatory measures begin implemented on February 10th. So we'll see what happens. Okay, before we get into what you're seeing supply chain leaders do and what they have been doing and what they'll continue to do to mitigate things, anything else you want to talk about in terms of the potential overall impact of the new tariffs and trade policies?
Yeah, I think the other thing for folks to continue to pay attention to is that, the president has talked about using tariffs, in a wide variety of manner. This weekend he was talking about putting tariffs on the EU because of trade deficits. He's talked about certain specific categories of products: steel, aluminum, copper, pharmaceuticals. So there's ongoing discussions of tariffs. There's continuing talk of a universal baseline tariff, which he talked about during the campaign and post-election. So the tariff talk has not gone away. It's going to continue, especially as they look at tariffs as a significant source of revenue. So I think for many companies, they need to continue to pay attention to that and really kind of dive into their supply chains to understand what their exposure is going to be, either as a direct importer or an indirect importer.
I should have been paying much more attention in my high school and my college economics classes, John. I tell you, we're getting an active hard knocks education here hour by hour, and I really appreciate you taking time to unpack all this stuff. Because some of what you shared here today, you can't get elsewhere, and you certainly can't get it easily. Let's talk about what supply chain organizations and their leaders have been doing and will be doing to navigate this fast evolving trade landscape, right? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, companies need to be taking a look at their supply chains and understand what their exposure and potential risk is to the variety of tariffs that are out there. I mean, I think one of the things we're trying to encourage members is, not to kind of overreact because as we see, a lot gets said, but until something's actually signed, officially, it doesn't become law or become action. But the challenge is that you've got a lot of companies that have been looking to shift their supply chains, but we all know how difficult it is. It's not something that can be done overnight. So for a lot of those companies who took the advice back in 2018 and 2019 and shifted out of China, they're looking to go elsewhere. But now they're thinking, if I'm going to Vietnam, is Vietnam next? Are they on the target? We've got a pretty big trade deficit with Vietnam. Part of that was because folks shifted to Vietnam. Is India next? There's been threats against kind of the BRIC countries over currency related issues. So it's, these threats keep coming, fast and furious. So just kind of paying attention and understanding kind of what's at stake and what the potential impact can be. I think we're trying to encourage folks to kind of share some of those impacts so we can certainly let legislators and elected officials know what those impacts are going to be, because they're the ones that need to be aware. While Congress really doesn't have a role with regards to some of these tariff authorities, unfortunately, they've got the president's ear. They can certainly weigh in with key folks in the administration to share their concerns. We certainly saw several Republicans talking about that on the current tariffs. Senator Grassley, he was talking about, trying to exclude potash for his farmers in Iowa because there's nowhere else they can get potash. So, I think that is an important part now too, is to kind of share some of those stories with your different trade associations, because I know we're all looking for that kind of data and detail. Whether it's talking to the press about it or again sharing it, with elected officials, so they really understand what this really means and the impact it's going to have on businesses, on consumers. For a lot of small businesses, they don't have the ability to make those shifts. They're going to have to absorb these costs or pass them on to the consumer. And many of them, are afraid that if they have to increase prices too much, the consumer is not going to buy the products and they could potentially go out of business.
Man, not checkers, not chess. It's like 7D, might be 12D chess here, Jon. So much to understand, so many upstream and downstream ramifications. Here is for optimistic thinking. I am hoping we can get a good deal done for all parties, especially here across the North American region. My dear friend Alan Jacques, based up in Canada, made a comment the other day, Jon, talking about they are going to place 25% tariffs on Supply Chain Now podcasts coming into the country. So we're trying to get prepared as well, Jon. All right. So how can folks, Jon, I really appreciate you've been appearing on our live streams for quite some time now. Always learn and get several pages of been there, done that insights. How can folks connect with you in the National Retail Federation?
Sure. So NRF, easy. Our website is www.nrf.com. My email, last name, first initial @nrf.com. As you know, active on social, whether it's X or LinkedIn. So I'm happy to connect with folks.
Jon, I appreciate that. And, I rely on your social feed. You broke the news that, to me at least, that deals had been struck and the tariffs were delayed just yesterday as I was going live on the Buzz. So, folks, connect with, follow Jon Gold, and, of course, our friends over at the National Retail Federation. Big thanks, Jon.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Folks, hope you enjoyed and learned from this conversation as much as I have. This is Scott Luton here on behalf of the Supply Chain Now team, challenging you to do good, give forward, be the change that's needed, and we'll see you next time right back here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.